Hey, greetings everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit now about what I will call a recap of some of the more important historical items that you've already dealt with in the readings for the past week or so. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but this is my take on what the highlights are. I am purposely not doing this in the form of a slideshow or something because I think first of all, the history is very, very important. We can't have any understanding of where we are today unless we go back to how we got there. And how we got there is basically the history of some of the things in this field. It's amazing to me, when we get into this a little bit more at another time, how close some of the parallels are between what happened even in England, before there was a United States, and what's happening in the United States in the more modern era. So I'm going to go over some of these highlights for you. I'm doing it in the form of a mini lecture because I'm hoping you're going to take some notes and things like that. I'm going to give my own take on some of the things that you read about. But I do want you to kind of embed some of these things into your brain because of, again, what I'm saying is the importance of the history as this course develops in things. So, we can go all the way back. The textbook, the chapter that you read started pretty much out with feudalism. But I'm going to go back even a little bit before that and just make a couple of remarks. We go all the way back to ancient Greek and Roman societies and things like that, and we always see instances of helping. People helped each other, through direct conveyance of, extra crops and things like that. If you had a bad crop and the farmer or whatever down the road had a better crop, people would exchange things and, very much barter things out and sometimes just outrightly give things to people. We also had people being helped by forms of begging and stuff. And we certainly continue to see that through the present day. But I just wanted to mention that even though the chapter kind of started with feudalism, helping and social welfare, really goes back as far back as there has been civilizations and stuff. So I'll start with really talking about feudalism. So in this period from about 1100 to 1550, we had a very rigid societal structure then. If you were a serf, you were a serf because you were born a serf. If you were a lord or a baron, you were born into that. There was no social mobility. You could not improve yourself. You could not rise from a serf to a lord position or something like that. Everything was very kind of flat and rigid in things. So as bad as that could be, the good side of it was that everybody was taken care of in some ways. Now, yes, the text, and I agree, did talk about some things such as forced, labor and, just another form of slavery and things like that. And I think those points are well taken. But the fact of the matter is that under the feudal society, people were taken care of. You lived on the land of a lord, and in return for you taking care of the crops or caring for the animals or whatever it was that your jobs were, you got a place to live and some food to eat and stuff like that. By the way, today's word of landlord comes directly from this concept. The lord of the land was the person. And he, and I say he on purpose because it was always a male, he was the be-all and the end-all. So that's basically a short version of feudalism. One of the things to remember, again, is not a whole lot of social mobility. And then we look at the Tudor Poor Laws. And one of the things I want to highlight about those in the 1500s or so was the concept of worthy versus unworthy poor. And this is a concept that continues today. Under the Tudor Poor Laws, they saw as the worthy categories people that were widowed, people that were disabled, and people that were old, aged. And in those cases, you kind of got a pass if you were in one of those categories. People did not expect you to work, and people were okay with helping you if you were in one of those categories. And so that system was kind of around for a while. Then we had the Elizabethan Poor Laws of 1601. I will tell you that historically this is a hugely important milestone, and as part of this class, you will be quizzed and tested on the Elizabethan Poor Laws in the future, I guarantee that. So the Elizabethan Poor Laws set out a few things. One was that this was the first governmental system of assistance, kind of nationally. We're talking about England here. So this is the first national system of helping, and they built in a system of taxation to support that. So certain percentages of taxes went to helping people that needed the help. But the other thing that they said was that the family was the prime source of assistance, and the government would step in only after the family could not care for them. So parents were responsible for their children directly, and when people got older, children were responsible for their parents. And this is where we had very much nuclear families. I'm sorry, my bad. Extended families. You would see under the same roof, so to speak, children, parents, grandparents, all living together, all caring for each other and things like that. So that if there was a disabled person in the house, someone else in the household would care for them. When it was time to reap the harvest from the fields and things like that, and there was babies involved, someone would stay behind and care for the babies and things. It was all done within the extended family. We didn't need a lot of government assistance then because the family was the prime giver of the assistance first. So that's something I wanted you to remember from that. This also, under the Elizabethan Poor Laws, established the categories of indoor relief and outdoor relief. And the indoor relief was kind of seen as being for the unworthy. Those are people that basically were sent to things like workhouses and poorhouses and things like that because you could work, and so they put you to work. It was kind of like government subsidized work and things. And then on the other side of things, they had the outdoor relief, which was seen as the worthy people, and this was much more an in-home situation. People would go into your home and help you with whatever else you needed. It's not too much of a stretch to say that this was an initial form of kind of social casework, where people would go into homes and help people out and stuff like that. Okay, so now we move to the colonial U.S., and, again, the reading made the point, I'll drive it home, that for all the braggadocio about people wanting to come to the New World, to have a new life and things like that, the fact of the matter is that what they took with them was the same as England. So the Elizabethan Poor Laws were established in 1601, and if you go back to your third and fourth grade elementary school history courses, we see that the Pilgrims arrived in Plymouth in 1620, and so not too far apart. So they brought with them what they knew, which was the Elizabethan Poor Laws. So the only thing I want to really say about colonial U.S. is that it was pretty much the same as it was over in England under the Elizabethan Poor Laws. So now we have the much vaster period of between independence of the United States, 1776, and about the 1920s. And some of the concepts we see that cropped up during this period was very much the proliferation of what was called the Protestant work ethic. Not what much government assistance was done here, because people's philosophy was kind of let it be, laissez-faire. You were seen as being a good person and worthy of salvation later on in the afterlife if you worked hard and cared for yourself and your family and things like that. Brings up an interesting question, which we may or may not explore later, which is in our current society, and I'm diverging a little bit here, can people be successful simply by working hard? I'll just have you ponder that as a side question. We may come back to that a little later. But anyway, back in between 1776 and about the 1920s, the Protestant work ethic was very big. And you were seen as being able to kind of help yourself just by sheer brute force and effort and things like that. Okay, now social Darwinism comes into play. I think people know about Darwin and his, or at least what's attributed to him, survival of the fittest from an animal point of view. The weaker, buffalo get killed off by someone else, and it kind of keeps the strain better to kind of eliminate the lower functioning parts of the animal kingdom. They became food for the other folks, for lack of a better way of looking at it. Well, that's Darwinism. Social Darwinism is a little bit more extreme and a little more cruel in my view. You can decide that yourself. But basically they said, let's let the same thing happen with people. If the poor have illness and disease and all of that kind of stuff because of they're poor, then so be it. They will die off and the society will be a better place because the less fortunate will not be with us for reasons that may be obvious. So there was not much government assistance during this period of time for the reasons that I'm saying. Included in this period is kind of the charity organization societies. I wanted people to have that on their little list. But again, this is seen in this country as the beginning of social work. The charity organization societies had the Friendly Visitor Program, who in the late 1800s would go around and kind of check on people and help them and things like that. Again, to make the point, not completely unlike more modern social caseworkers that may go into people's homes to help them out and things like that. Okay, in the late 1800s to about 1930, we had the settlement house movement. This was big. This was under a woman named Jane Addams, because this started to see poverty as something that can be fought locally at the neighborhood level. Jane Addams and her followers started to see that there are social causes to people being poor as opposed to just individual deficiencies. I certainly think in the modern world that's a healthy attitude to have. People might not be poor because they're just lazy or something like that and they don't want to work. They might be poor because of societal conditions. There's a high unemployment rate, discrimination, various things might cause people to be poor. That doesn't have anything to do with them individually. So this all started under the Jane Addams settlement house movement. I think it's worthy of note. And then the last real thing on my list, before we get to the modern times, which we're going to not talk about today, is the depression that started with the stock market crash of 1929. This also needs to be on your list because it led to the Social Security Act of 1935. So the stock market crashed in 1929. It took the government, because remember there wasn't national government assistance at this time, it took the government several years to kind of get their act together and to come up with the Social Security Act of 1935. And that was our first system of national social welfare assistance. So I make the very strong parallel, in case you haven't, between the Elizabethan Poor Laws of 1601 being the first form of government assistance in England to the Social Security Act of 1935 being the first form of government assistance in this country. Very strong parallels there. The two laws did different things, but they're very parallel because they were really the first and the most important stuff. Within the Social Security Act of 1935, we had social insurance provisions and we had public assistance provisions. This goes a little bit beyond what the chapter reading said, and this is why I think it's important for me to supplement some of these things sometimes. So social insurance basically says that there are societal causes for things. Public assistance very much looks at things from a personal fault point of view. And within the Social Security Act of 1935, we had different forms of specific programs that had their roots in this legislation. So something, for instance, like Social Security itself, the thing that at least most people know as Social Security, the thing that your parents or grandparents might be collecting when they get older and stuff. That is a social insurance program. Nobody looks down on people that receive that because people think, well, you've worked, you're old, you can't work anymore, we're going to help you out. And people don't seem to have a problem with that from a societal perspective. Unlike the public assistance programs, things like what used to be AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children, which is now known as TANF, TANFP, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, those are set up and seen by society as a very kind of negative and punitive thing. Any public assistance program shares some common characteristics. It's needs-based, which means you have to prove you're eligible. It's usually offered on a short-term and an emergency basis. And there is a high degree of stigma against it. That's kind of, in a short spell, what defines public assistance programs. Social insurance programs, on the other hand, are kind of the opposite of that. They're seen as longer term. The individual is not seen as being the fault. It's normal and accepted part of society. There's really not a big amount of stigma attached to these programs. And again, I made the distinction between temporary assistance to needy families, which, by the way, is the basic, most prevalent form of that kind of assistance. When someone says to someone, oh, she's on welfare, that family's on welfare, that's usually what they mean. There is no welfare program by that name, but that's kind of what some people incorrectly identify as welfare. And again, when somebody is collecting, unemployment insurance, when they're collecting their Social Security check and a few other things, they're seen as, that's okay, that's normal, there's no stigma against that. So those are my highlights of the historical stuff, most of which was in that chapter, but I have amplified it and added to it. I would respectfully request that you make some good notes about this, because we are going to come back to this later on in the course, and certainly everything that I've mentioned in my own highlights is something that is potential quiz and test material in the future. So signing off, thank you very much, and bye-bye.